Hello, and welcome to the Muses Lab, your destination for all things spiritual, sensual, and pleasurable. Here I explore the nuances of our human experience, connect with practitioners to support your glow up, and share my lessons and blessings as perspective to move you closer to alignment and self-empowerment. I invite you to join me on this adventure of discovery and hope what you receive inspires you to become the muse of your life's journey. So without further ado, let's explore. Hello, and welcome to the Music Lab Podcast. It's your girl, Siobhan L. And you know what? I kind of low-key feel like this might be a series, so I'm just going to flow with it. Although I'm not going to label it a series because if I do, my brain is going to hyperfocus. I'm building this series bit by bit and will not allow me to flow freely. It'll be rigid, so I'm going to allow these thoughts to flow. All right, I'm back with another iteration of the villain exploration. And if you haven't listened to season 4, episode 5, this is where I introduce the idea of the villain as a mindset and archetype and ask, have we been viewing the villain all wrong? Spoiler alert. We have. Also, in that episode, I began to explore the villain archetype and its descriptors as a tool of liberation. And while I'm still unpacking what that looks like, it is the next step of the journey that I'm on. Also, I talk about coming across content from other creators, particularly Black women, persons along the feminine spectrum, and non binary who are exploring the varying aspects of the villain archetype or taboo aspects of femininity. These intersections are all starting to come together for me that center around becoming an outlier, moving autonomously, amplifying our voice, taking back our voice, and reclaiming our time, as our beloved Congresswoman Maxine Waters said. Along with these different associations and iterations of villains, I'm also seeing the term dark femininity, the dark feminine, or the dark femme. Because I'm an ADHD girly who needs things to either be finite or mutable, I want to step into the space of exploring if the villain era we're in is just interchangeable with the dark feminine or if we should call it what it is, the villain. But first, I want to touch on the use of the word femme. The terms femme and feminine are not interchangeable. In an article by Sam Manzella on the queer news platform, Them, they define femme as a form of queer expression not specific to their identity. So persons who are trans, non-binary, as well as queer men can identify as femme. Also in the same instance, not all queer and trans women identify as femme. Sam goes on to share that in our patriarchal world, feminist comes with some risks. This is the basis of femphobia, or the systemic subjugation of and disdain for femininity under cisgender heterosexual patriarchy, which is why the word femme is important because it encapsulates the unique experience of navigating life as a queer person who presents in a feminine way. I recognize there are a lot of straight girls who use the term femme in their content and it leaves them bumping heads with the queer community because essentially it's appropriative. When you peel back the layers, their content is not for persons who exist along the feminine spectrum, which would include those who identify as femme. So to use the term loosely and not clearly define how it exists in your respective ecosystems is careless. Within the Muses Lab ecosystem, my content is for those who live along this spectrum, a term that I adopted from Rashida Webb Miller. So by shaping my ecosystem and content from this lens, my purpose is to then highlight within the spectrum of femininity, as well as human beings in the community with me who resonate with this spectrum, wherever they identify, as it pertains to gender and sexual identity, as well as overall expression. Essentially, I want to ensure that I'm including and encompassing this expression with range. So when other straight girls use the word femme, I'm asking myself, are we using femme fatale? The seductive, mysterious, and often deadly allure of the feminine expression, because context is super important when presenting these concepts to our respective audiences. Even in the reframe, the origin stories are also important. So in the show notes, I'll have links to what I'm discussing here for further research. And oftentimes, the rabbit hole of information is necessary to have a full scope of what researchers, theorists, and such have shared to help influence your interpretation. But let's stay with the femme fatale. What I'm realizing is this is where the origin story of the dark feminine begins. And while feminine is an identity and femininity is the expression of that identity, femme leads toward embodiment, which is why clarifying how the word femme is used is important. Really, the issue for me is the use of the word dark. And a lot of that stems from me being Black and the color and culture of Blackness being associated with things that are inherently negative. One could argue the way dark feminine is framed is that it represents the radical expressions of femininity that are opposite of the white patriarchal gaze, but that still infers the words dark and black are bad. When referencing opposing attributes that are found favorable or live in the light, I like to use the term shadow to acknowledge that which is hidden. Using this as a foundation, when we look at the aspects of dark femininity, is it dark? Francesca Bliss defines the dark feminine as the aspect of the feminine psyche that has been suppressed and repressed. In her definition, she includes qualities such as being wild, untamed, unapologetic, angry, fierce, seductive, and powerful. Alicia of Enoa Soul believes it is extroverted energy that shows up as authentic, fearless, passionate, and confident. High key, both definitions sound a lot like the femme fatale, but also come from white women whose experiences are totally different from Black and non Black persons of color. Their experiences and perspectives influence their interpretation. So, I went to my girl Lotus Laloba's piece, Floating in Darkness, Embracing the Transformative Power of the Dark Feminine. In it, she shares the essence of darkness as a space of rebirth, a return home to our origins. That's a space of safety and nurturing. In this breakdown, Lotus establishes three embodiments of darkness as the divine mother, the villain archetype, and the wild woman. Each captures the dark feminine as honoring the shadows and depths of who we are and the ways in which we can show up in this space. Unapologetic and authenticity aren't just descriptors, but married and integrated into the breath of who we are, embracing the peace that duality brings and no longer fearing the dark, but rather seeing it as another iteration of self. Is very lovers in tarot. Additional origins I attribute to the dark feminine archetype is Black Moon Lilith. I remember this piece back in 2016 on Hood Witch by Amelia Quint that featured Lilith signs and erotic astrology. It's the first time I heard of the placement and was definitely drawn to the energy. Black Moon Lilith, however, is not a planet nor an asteroid, but rather a mathematical point that's exact between the Earth and the Moon. An empty space, if you will, or a cosmic void that is said to embody the spirit of what Lilith represents. Her story is rooted in reclamation, self-empowerment, radical truth, and rebellion. So it makes sense to associate that empty space with her. Being cast out of the Garden of Eden, labeled a succubus and Lucifer's wife, her story shows a woman who is villainized and demonized for holding her own and speaking up in self-advocacy, for expressing what she desired and refusing submission to her male counterpart. All of these attributes go against the patriarchal description of femininity. So placing a stamp of darkness on the ability to assert one's own power, autonomy, and live comfortably in their carnal desires creates a fear for anyone itching to express this part of themselves. This in turn leaves a void between yourself, the earth, and your true emotions, the moon, a hidden aspect suppressed by following what the status quo claims you should be. I would say that it is villainous to go against the grain and choose to unearth or shed light on this cosmic void within the ecosystem of ourselves, to be the antithesis of what is demure, meek, prim, and proper, a mirror that reflects the aspects of what the proverbial hero refuses to acknowledge. No longer fearful of coloring outside the lines or hyper focusing on something that is only for your betterment, or becoming competitive as a way to catapult yourself to the next level, or even reveal traits and characteristics about yourself that brings you closer to the zenith of your power. Which leads me back to Lotus's expression of the dark feminine. One could say the embodiment of the dark feminine or the femme fatale can lead us down this path, and the villain arc is the catalyst that incites this path. But also, the dark feminine is a living, breathing embodiment that we live through and navigate daily. And the villain arc is how we choose to express this form of embodiment. This brings me further back to the original root of this exploration through Vanessa Ulrich's Villain Challenge. From there, I begin with deciphering whether or not creative mastery is a dark path, to then understanding that the villain can be a tool of self-actualization, and that following the villainous path pushes us to dedicate our gifts and talents to raise the vibration of the collective. And then lastly, that the villainous path is shunned and demonized because of the possibility that mastery through dedication makes it harder for the powers that be to oppress and colonize those who are masters. In her piece, Lotus shares that the villain arc reflects how darkness works in our lives. Like the hero, each of us encounters our own shadows, facing the parts of ourselves we'd rather not see. That we are shaped and transformed through these encounters, which allows us to then transform into something more. It is villainous to evolve. The movie Wall-E is the perfect example of what happens when humans become rote, comfortable in their space of convenience, not desiring more than what's necessary. And if we're using Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a metric, for some people, that's fine. But for those who thirst to reach the top of the pyramid, it then makes them, us, the villain for daring to dream big. Folks would rather name us gluttonous than to accept that our human nature is to evolve. So much in this world has made us comfortable with just enough that being the villain and channeling that pent up energy into something useful feels like an attack on the mindset of those who choose otherwise. The villain then becomes the mirror, a reflection who you desire to be in that cosmic void of Black Moon Lilith that sits in the shadows waiting to be discovered, a nebulous entity that warbles in the space of you. And the moments when you feel activated, enraged, sultry, and flirty, that's the essence of BML, the dark feminine, and the villain tapping your sacral with the hope to be ignited. While I'm still working on embracing the term dark feminine, I do recognize the bridge that it plays in grounding us in the shadows and the darkness, the place where villains are born and studied to embark on their greatness. I think my next exploration will be to unpack what it looks like for our villain era and arc to be a tool of liberation. So I guess it's going to be a series regardless of the resistance with my brain. But you know what? It's really hard to fight spirit when it's leading you down a specific path. Anywho, thank you for tapping into this week's episode, and until next time. Thank you for tapping into the Muses Lab. I hope you enjoyed this week's adventure. Be sure to like this episode, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and share the wealth with others. Sign up for my newsletter and join the TML community at www.themuseslab.com. Receive weekly musings, early access, and exclusive drops, as well as discounts on products and services. Thank you once again for tapping in, and until next time.